Well, good afternoon. I'm Chris Scherer, Member Communications Director of the Society of Broadcast Engineers and the co-host of this month's episode of the SBE Webxtra, the SBE chapter of the web. This is a monthly SBE meeting, usually held on the third Monday of the month. The SBE is the Association for Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Professionals, with about 5,000 members, mostly in the U.S., but also around the world. The SBE Webxtra is sponsored by Katrine. Katrine, unique experience, individual solutions, reliable performance. The host of today's SBE Webxtra is SBE board member Kirk Harnack, who is also the chair of the SBE Social Networking Committee. How you doing, Kirk?
I am great. Thank you for asking, Chris. And I got to tell you, I'm so excited about our guest today because we did a pre-show meeting last week, and oh my goodness, what fun information and useful information we're about to find out over the next hour. Chris, I always forget our format. Are we introducing our guest right now?
If you want to go ahead and say hi, we can get to the member update in a minute.
Let's say hi. Our guest is David Gleason. David is the proprietor of the website, worldradiohistory.com. And this site, I'm falling in love with it. Maybe it's the narcissist in me, but also the curious historian in me too. David, welcome in to the SBE Webxtra.
Fun to be here. Quite exciting for me. This is my first web conference.
Well, good. Well, we're glad to have you. And I based on our conversation from last week in our pre-show meeting, we're going to hold on to our hats. There is some fun information that we're going to find out about your website and about the incredible amount of stuff that's there, stuff that just honestly makes me happy. I think it's just as cool as can be. So we're going to get to you, David, in just a few minutes. Chris Scherer, though, has a member update for us right now. Chris?
Yes, I do. I have your SBE member update for November 16, 2020. There's one more reminder that the SBE held its national meeting and awards program on September 23rd. You can watch the replay on our SBE YouTube channel at sbe.org/YouTube. Chapters, you might consider watching this playback as a chapter meeting. Also, for those chapter chairs and secretaries, if you are meeting virtually, you can still report those meeting reports. A little redundant there on my part, but report your reports to the national office just as you would an in-person meeting. These meetings count towards the minimum 5 meetings held during a calendar year that a chapter needs to qualify for an annual chapter rebate. There are some webinars on the SBE calendar. On November 18 at 2 p.m. Eastern, we present HD Radio Streamlined and Redefined 4th Generation Hardware. Alan Jurison discusses the new generation of HD radio hardware that combines the importer and exporter into a single appliance that simplifies operation while providing integrated time alignment, among other enhancements. On December 3rd, we present Spectrum Allocations, Broadcast Auxiliary, and Technical Regulatory Issues for Broadcast Engineers. SBE General Counsel Chris Imlay will lead this town hall discussion on current technical regulatory topics, spectrum allocations, and broadcast auxiliary spectrum issues. And then looking ahead to the new year, in January, the 2021 updated IP networking series launches with Part 1, Network Topology and Standards, on January 21st. The topics to be covered include network hardware perspectives, network topology modules, the OSI model, IEEE IETF networking standards, TCP/IP network protocols, LAN and WAN technologies, and Ethernet physical options, and the Ethernet radio in general. For more information on webinars by SBE, go to sbe.org/webinars. And finally, on the certification side, the next SBE certification exam window at local chapters is February 5th to the 15th, 2021. The application deadline for that is December 31st, 2020. The complete SBE 2021 certification exam schedule is available on the SBE website. If a local chapter exam is not convenient for you or not possible because of COVID restrictions, private proctoring is available. More information on SBE certification is available at sbe.org/certification. And that is your SBE member update for November 16, 2020. Kirk?
Perfectly delivered, Chris. You should consider radio as an option in your career path.
Since I have a face for radio, that makes perfect sense.
Well, okay, that makes 2 of us, and you also have a background that's a little bit parallel to that of our guest, in that you've been a broadcast engineer, so has our guest, David Gleason, and you are also involved in the publishing world, and in a way, David is too. So I like those parallels. And David's website is absolutely fascinating. It's also fascinating because it contains a lot of material that you were responsible for, Chris.
Yep. As we spoke about earlier, and some of our viewers may remember, I was the editor of a publication first called BE Radio and then Radio Magazine from 1997 until 2014. The publication ceased a couple of years ago. A sister publication of Broadcast Engineering, and I actually started as a contributor to Broadcast Engineering. And then one day, my predecessor at BE Radio then, Skip Peasy, called me and said, "Hey, Chris, I'd like to come be an editor at the magazine." And the funny thing is, it was one of those days. I was actually at WMMS in Cleveland at the time as chief engineer. And the front desk operator's telephone switch console, which was hardwired in place in those days, somebody had spilled a pop soda, whichever your preferred term is, into it. And so it was all gummed up. And I have the top off in there, wires everywhere and pieces and parts. And I'm just in a really horrible mood. And Skip calls and asks if I'd like to come and work at the magazine. And I thought, what, and get out of show business? So for my own personal career, it worked out well. And I stopped getting calls in the middle of the night and spent the next 17 years as the editor of a trade publication, which I'm very proud of that history. And it's actually because of that I found Dave Gleason's website. I don't remember the search I was doing now. I was looking for something online. And one of the things that popped up was an archive of broadcast publications. So I started poking around and found Radio Magazine and Broadcast Engineering Magazine. And then as I'm looking down the list, I'm realizing there are a couple of back issues. Well, they're all back issues now that he was missing. And I have a complete set of Radio Magazine in my basement. I'm probably one of the only people who can claim that anymore. So I've been scanning a few here and there and submitting them to Dave to add to the archive. It's legacy information in many ways. Some of it was a little future looking in some ways, but I think it's all part of it that I bet a lot of us have a lot of information, and Dave can tell us what he's looking for when we'll talk to him in just a moment. I know he's happy to accept the donations and continue this fantastic archive of information. And it's not just the radio and TV technical pubs. I mean, it goes way beyond. It's quite extensive. And that's why I'm looking forward to hearing from Dave as well on everything he has, everything he wants, and a little bit about how he puts it all together as well.
Chris, I'm delighted that you said that you've got a collection of BE radio magazines, your basement, maybe one of the only ones. Just hit me like a ton of bricks. I've got a collection of them as well. And I think I may just have the ones in which I was a columnist. You know, how narcissistic of me to save the ones that I was in. But I didn't even think of that until you brought it up. I doubt I have anything that Dave doesn't already have, but hey, it'd be worth a look. And so let's bring our guest back, David Gleason, worldradiohistory.com. David, welcome into our show. Good to see you.
Good to see all of you. This is a fun first experience with an online conference like this, so I'm pretty excited and really glad to be able to talk about the work of the latter part of my radio career, which has been over 60 years now. And this has got to be the most fun, partly because there are no more of those 2 a.m. calls.
Aha. Yep. Chris and you have some pictures to show. We're going to get to those in a little bit. I want to know a little bit about you, David Gleason, because I didn't realize that you actually have a history in broadcast engineering, and it's a pretty interesting one because it didn't start in the U.S. Give us the little coffee, over coffee version of how you got started doing this and the kind of engineering that you got involved in because you had to.
Well, starting at age 13, I'd been kind of a gopher for an AM/FM in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, and went to do a year of school in Ecuador in '64. And partway through my school year, I stumbled across the ability to obtain a license for a brand new station on 570 AM. And I bought it through a legal local company and started to put it on the air, went to the U.S. and visited with Larry Cervone at Gates in Quincy and bought all the equipment. Got back to Ecuador with an Audimax, Volumax, cartridge tape equipment, and everything brand new. And no engineer would touch it because they had never seen any of this technology before. So for about 6 months, I took every course that Cleveland Institute had, right down to the algebra and calculus, and became my own chief engineer and put the station on the air without burning up too many tubes and components, and went on to build another dozen radio stations in Ecuador over the next about 6 years, until I ran into some trouble with the military government and went to Puerto Rico, where I did the same thing over again, where I was managing stations, but also being the chief operator.
Oh my goodness. What a beginning. I can't imagine starting out that way, but it must've been, what an adventure for a young, 18, 20, 22-year-old man. That's amazing.
Well, when you're 18 years old, you don't know enough to know that something is very risky, so you do it. And one of the things I did was the first top 40 radio station in South America. And I had no idea that this hadn't been done and that it probably wouldn't work. Fortunately, it did work. And so went on to build the first FM station, the first FM stereo station in northern South America. And for that one, we used a test bench stereo test unit from Philips in Netherlands as our stereo generator, because all our equipment was homemade by myself and some assistants.
I'm guessing that getting your start in Ecuador, a lot of us, I remember me as a young teenager, built a Heathkit shortwave radio, and the first station I picked up was HCJB out of Quito, Ecuador. I'm guessing you probably didn't have any involvement with that station.
Actually, I did. I made good friends of several of their engineers, and those engineers helped me design my first FM transmitters, which were studio transmitter links for my first 3 AM stations. And all of those were simulcast on FM with equipment, obviously Hollow State, that was designed by the HCJB engineers, and which I managed to burn my fingers with the soldering iron a lot on putting together.
So we engineers in the broadcast business, we learn, you learn by some doing, probably reading some manuals. I know when I was starting out, I would just read manuals voraciously. I'd try to understand. I had no formal electronics training. And so I would read manuals. I loved the manuals from Continental, from Gates, Harris, and from ITC, because they explain, okay, this transistor goes low, this pulls this up to here, and I, okay, I'm starting to get this now. So did you learn the same way, or did you get some more formalized education?
Just the basic electronics and broadcast electronics from home study courses. And the rest of it was trial and error and some assistance from more qualified engineers. We had in the Quito, Ecuador market, the person who had been one of the chief engineers of Telefunken in Germany before the war, and he was a refugee who left in the late 30s and was an absolute brilliant engineer who helped me design the diplex for my first diplex pair of AMs, and quite a few other projects that were way beyond my area of competence.
So at what point did you begin to turn your attention to the idea of cataloging old information, of taking pictures or scanning manuals, catalogs, industry, things like that? How'd that start?
Well, in the late 90s, I apparently turned into the source for background information where I was working, which was Heftel broadcasting that became Hispanic Broadcasting and then became Univision. And I figured, hey, I'd better pick up a couple of old issues of the Broadcasting Yearbook. And that, of course, generated more questions. And by around 2000, 2001, I put a few of those things on the internet. And as I noticed that I was getting quite a lot of page views, and I thought at that time maybe 100 or 200 a day was terrific, I started browsing eBay and other sources and asking friends for stuff that was stored at the old transmitter room. And it just grew from there. It essentially has grown bigger than I am. I have things to scan backed up that'll keep me busy for months.
All right. So let's talk about the website, worldradiohistory.com. What kind of a website is this?
It is anything that I think is somehow related to broadcasting or to my own personal curiosity. I guess you could say there are three key sections. The first of most interest right now is the technical side that has publications like you mentioned, BE, BME, the old RCA, magazine for customers, and lots of technical magazines from going back to the 20s and 30s. There's a section on broadcast as a business that includes both programming and broadcast management. And then there is a lot that deals with music and its relationship with broadcasting, such as every billboard from the late 20s on to 2016, R&R. We're going to add the Hamilton report from the 70s and things like Gavin and so on that everyone's program director read in their time. And then there is a lot of hobbyist things, including DX clubs, hobbyist magazines like Popular Electronics, which there's a complete collection, and many of the smaller but also well-known publications, and everything is in parallel in the United Kingdom as well. And a good deal of Australian material is starting to build up.
So when you go to the website, worldradiohistory.com, and Folks, you've got to bookmark this site. It's just a wealth of information. So, and you want to think of it. When you want to know something about it, you got to think of it. But I tell you what, when I first click on this site and I see all those thumbnails of all those magazines, two thoughts come to mind. First of all, the thought of, I can subscribe to any 11 magazines for 5 cents. But they're all way in the past, of course. And the other thought that comes in, how is it legal for you to scan all these and put them online? Aren't there copyright things going on here? Can you explain that?
There are definite copyrights. In many cases with publications that still have a live descendancy, I get permission. Most magazine publishers, right down to Billboard and Broadcasting Magazine, have granted permission. Others, you cannot find anyone. And so, like many websites that have old publications, we have instructions online for takedown. And in the entire history of the site, I think that I've only been asked to take down 3 publications. And that was because, unbeknown to me, a new entity had DVDs or flash drives for sale with the same material. And in some of those cases, a number of the people who have the rights to those have said, once the sales of the flash drives declines, we'll give you permission just so you can preserve it. And one of the key issues is that libraries all across the country, both at the college, university, and public library level, are getting rid of lots of old material if they are not, those materials are not called on frequently. So what's happening is a book that might get requested once every 2 years about some part of the history of radio or technology at a library in Quincy, Illinois, that happens all across the country. And they decide, well, nobody really looks at this, so we're going to discard it. And it either goes to the dumpster or it goes to a reseller who puts it on eBay. That's where I appear and make these things available, because most of us are not educators or graduate students of college with access to the Hatha Trust archive of magazines and books. So this makes a lot of things that are out of print, out of publication, available and hopefully downloaded by lots and lots of people. So we're creating or spawning a whole collection of PDFs that, even if one collection disappears, somebody else will have saved all of them.
So I'm looking at the front of the first page of the website. And of course, there's Broadcasting Magazine, Television Magazine, TV Radio Age, U.S. Radio Magazine, Canadian Broadcaster. I mean, there's literally dozens, and I'm sure it might run into hundreds. Billboard Magazine under the music related, Cashbox, remember Cashbox Magazine, Music Reporter, and then R&R, as you mentioned already, Gavin Report, FMQB is there, Hits Magazine, Hit Makers, on and on and on. The magazines that you would see at a radio station, especially if you worked in radio. I don't know, well, not so many magazines around now, around the radio station, but back when things were really chugging along, back in the 80s and 90s, I would see all, the more popular ones here at the radio station. So I'm glad you have defined for us. You have music-related, music business, radio business magazines, and then the technical ones. How many magazines would you say that you have some issues of on the site?
Oddly enough, I've never counted that. I would guess when you go into some of the pages that have just single or very few issues of a publication, it's somewhere around 800 to 900 different titles.
Yeah. Wow. All right. I'm curious about some of the means of technically scanning these things in. I think we all know what scanners are. I mean, I have a little scanner in the room next door, printer scanner, all in one type thing. But I think you're probably looking at better quality than that. And well, let me ask you this right off: is the text searchable?
Yes. Everything I scan is searchable. Most things that are provided by people who have their own scans, if the scan is high enough quality, it can be made searchable. You can do OCR on it. And if you go to broadcast engineering, there's a little button towards the upper right of the page where you can search the entire collection, or you can search them by decade. So if you put in your name or Gates or Harris, or you can search for magazines and the exact page where that appears. There are also searches on the site that will allow you to find a publication by title or by content. And there is a global search where you can look for the whole site to see where a certain term appears. It won't give you the exact page where it appears, but it will give you a hint as to what magazines you should be looking at. And almost every magazine that has more than 20 or so copies has its own search. Now, remember, the search this lives on a server that is basically one of those web servers that has 2 CPUs and a bunch of memory. And it is not like Google that has arrays of devices making searches. So it takes a little while the deeper you want to go. The more publications, the more cups of coffee you can drink while you wait.
Okay. All right. Chris Scherer is along here too. And Chris, I wanted to, I haven't seen the pictures that you may have provided that we could look at. Chris, do you want to walk us through any of those pictures right now?
We can start off with that. I went through the site and found a handful of things that kind of just caught my eye for one reason or another. And Suncast, if you could put up the first one there for us, please. I thought this was fun because it's the oldest one that Dave has on file of the Journal of the Society of Broadcast Engineers. And I've forgotten the year already, and I can't quite read it on my thumbnail there. 1964. There it is.
Yes,
get a little closer. John Battison was the editor. and just kind of there. He's got a few of these of the old journal. In fact, on my next visit, while I work for the SBE now, I'm not based in the Indianapolis office. But on a future trip to the office, I want to go through the archive we have and see if we have some back issues that Dave doesn't have. And if I can scan them and provide them, I will be more than happy to do that for him.
I'm really
By
curious
the way,
about page. Oh,
if I can interrupt there,
Sure.
if anyone has anything that they can loan or donate, I'll be very pleased to give those scans, both the raw JPG scans and the searchable PDFs, to the donor for their own collection. And if any organization like SBE wants some help in organizing a collection for their own website, that's one of the things I've done on a number of occasions.
Excellent. Well, I will probably take you up on that at some point, Dave, once I see what's actually in the collection. If we advance to the next slide, number CO2 there, this one is kind of interesting because it's also it's from Broadcast Engineering magazine from December 1961. And this is the famous editorial, the editor's cue line, written by then the editor of Broadcast Engineering, John Battison, where this, you see the column says Engineer Symposium. It's kind of an L-shaped column. That was John's first call for the organization of what became the Society of Broadcast Engineers. It wasn't until 3 or 4 years later that the wheels really got rolling and things got put together. But this is the very beginning. This is the roots of the society we know today. John called for the creation of an organization that served the needs of the station level people, because other groups were a little higher up the chain with the consulting engineers and higher. And he didn't feel that while there are some common interests and commonality between the skills, the specific needs weren't the same. And he thought that something that became the SBE would be useful to individuals like that. So that was another one that I thought was fun. If we go on to the next one, just an early copy cover of the proceedings from the NARTB before they dropped the RT for the NAB as we know it today. The engineering conference from 1957, the Conrad Hilton Hotel, where they used to hold their convention a lot. In fact, one of the first SBE, what became the SBE meetings, was held at the Conrad Hilton as well a few years later. Moving on, I've got 2 copies of trade publications, which I believe May 1959 was the first issue of Broadcast Engineering. And then the next one is the first issue of then BE Radio. In time, we moved on and just called it Radio Magazine, but this is January 1994. I was a contributor to Broadcast Engineering, and then I switched over to BE Radio. I think you might have done the same thing, Kirk, when you were doing it in those days. And then I've got 4 others that I thought were just kind of fun. If we skip to the next one, it's Radio World. But no, not that Radio World. It's the old Radio World. This one from 1922. There was another publication of the same name that we might know today. But it's I've forgotten when it stopped publication, maybe through the 30s, if I'm going by memory. Kind of another fun thing to look at and look at the state of the art of the technology in 1922 and beyond. A couple others that I added to the list, 2 more trade publications, BME, Broadcast Management and Engineering.
Oh, yeah.
Something of a competitor to Broadcast Engineering. I remember getting that and reading that one as well. Never contributed to that one, but I just grabbed a kind of a random sample cover from, if I remember, this is the 80s. Yeah, looks like it, 85. And then one more was Electronic Media, which was more news-oriented. Probably sort of similar to some of the other news media news outlets today. Also another one at Cease Publication, but that was one that I used to see on the front stand, front table at the waiting room at the stations all the time, and probably had my own subscription at one point as well. So the last one I pulled out, just kind of a sampling indicative of some of the other material that I know Dave has. Here are a couple of catalog covers from RCA, one for audio equipment and one for transmitting equipment for TV, 55 and 56 respectively, if I remember. But again, a wealth of historical information, indicative of what Dave has all across the site. So just some fun things that I grabbed that I thought would be fun to share and look at. And once again, if there's something you have in your basement, you as a viewer, get a hold of Dave, tell him what you have. If he needs it or wants it or doesn't have it, I'm sure he'd be happy to take it off your hands and archive it for posterity.
In fact, a number of things I have were found at old transmitter sites. When the KRKD site in Los Angeles was being set up for the temporary emergency site for KFI, when the KFI tower was hit by an airplane, a whole lot of old broadcasting yearbooks and trade publications were found, and those were immediately delivered to me, and they now live on at the website rather than in a dumpster.
Excellent. Now, you have a lot of station documentation as well, as I recall.
We do everything from something that was a big custom back in the 30s, which was to publish station booklets that had pictures of the air staff and the transmitter and the studios as a way of showing people how this new thing called radio worked, to everything from station engineering. I like to have samples of typical FCC filings going back as far as I can get for things like directional antennas, STAs, proof of performance, anything related to licensing a radio station, both from the license itself, legal aspect, to the technical exhibits.
Wonderful. Kind of wish I would have known that before. I bet you there were a lot of things at stations that I left behind that have since gone to the great compost in the sky at this point. So
we've been talking a lot about
things, Kirk.
Yeah, well, we've been talking a lot about magazines, but you also have books. Now we got to, if you go to the first page of the website, you see all these magazine covers. Talk to me about what kinds of books that you may have scanned in, and then we'll also talk about the catalogs, because that's terrifically interesting. What about books?
Books have a little harder copyright issue. Generally, one can achieve some kind of consent. If the publisher no longer exists and is untraceable, then they can be used with a takedown notice on the hopes that people will understand it. As I said, there's not been any objection to any of the content in that area. It's mostly things published before the 70s and 80s, going back to a lot of technical items in the pre-radio era. And in that area, I'm trying to document how original radio telegraphy developed into sound oral broadcasting. And there are also a lot of biographies on early radio people, ranging from entrepreneurs like Sarnoff to people who developed technology, going back to Marconi, Armstrong. As a matter of fact, I have about 2 months worth of Broadcasting magazine from the early 40s that have Major Armstrong's address label on them. And I'm kind of proud of those.
Wow.
That's cool. What about then catalogs? Because I think a real joy for me is to go to a transmitter site or radio station and to find some old catalog, typically RCA or Gates catalog, and I'm sure there were some others, and some of the distributors who were around a long time ago. Some still are. What about catalogs? What do you find interest in those?
There's a lot of interest. I think it's more the fun of looking at old stuff, and it brings back memories of how to put in the 0K resistor in an early Audimax. And we have some stuff going back into the 30s, when, of course, the phone company had its own broadcast equipment division, and we have early RCA, obviously Western Electric, GE, that type of equipment. There's some catalogs that have the very first post-World War II FM transmitters, including entire catalogs that are just for start-up FMs in the 1946 to 49 period.
And then what about equipment manuals? Are those popular on the site? Do you have many manuals?
There are lots of manuals from my perspective, very few from an industry perspective, because every few years, even a particular model has a new manual if the model continues to be active. You know, we all know how many redesigns of the TE3 Exciter there were.
And your favorite
I think I just heard a collective cringe across the entire universe.
Having built my own exciters as a not very skilled engineer, comparatively, I was amazed how that one got to market.
All right, I want to talk about the uses that you think that people have, and I'm sure there are myriad. Research would be fantastic. If you were writing a paper and you needed some historical information on radio in, I don't know, in Akron, Ohio, or in Portland, Oregon, you can find all kinds of localized information through publications, and it's all searchable. So historical research, just general enjoyment. You can do what I did, which is to look up, very narcissistically, look up your own name and see where you appear in the annals of broadcasting. And then I found I do have a huge collection. I have several years of BE Radio magazine. And look, Chris, you'll be so proud of me. They all have these plastic, three ring binder things in them.
Wow.
I've got probably about 6 or 7 years of BE radios right here. So I suspect, David, that you probably have every edition of BE Radio, right? Yeah, I'm sure you do. So anyway, David, the question then, talk to me about the uses that you believe people have for your site.
It ranges from things like, at least once a week or so, I get a request to use one of my scans and to search for the high resolution original bitmap scan of a cover or an article in a magazine for a movie or documentary where they want to put some piece of authenticity into it. They'll print the scan and use it as a magazine that sits on a table in a scene in a movie. Then we have lots of historians who not only are interested in broadcasting, but who may be looking at the social aspects that were reflected via broadcasting. There are hobbyists, there are ham radio operators, there are DXers who, of course, have fun looking at previous era type material for their own pastime or hobby. Of course, there are lots of people who like to look at things that represent the years they were active in the industry, and lots of university level or graduate student researchers who simply have questions. And in a case like that, it's a little difficult for me because I am basically a librarian. I'm the chief engineer. I don't design the equipment. And in this case, I collect the magazines, but I didn't write them. So often I cannot give an answer, but I can send the person to what I believe is a source that can provide deeper information or can do research.
We're talking with David Gleason about worldradiohistory.com, the website, worldradiohistory.com. It is what a service to our industry, a rather small industry, but it's been important for, we just had the 100-year anniversary. David, what is the oldest thing that people would find on your website?
There are some items from the turn of the century, not this one, the previous one. And these are cases where I document the development of radio telegraphy developing into radio telephony, because that's the roots of the broadcast industry. Obviously, my main focus is radio broadcasting, not the technology per se. So the items I have to have some kind of tie-in, either historical or related to the technology of our own industry.
Are there any amateur radio resources on the site?
Interesting you should ask that. There are quite a few, but a number of the biggest ham radio associations that I won't name in both the US and England will not allow their publications to be put into a free access website. My thinking is that putting a ham radio magazine onto a broad focused website will encourage people to take interest in the ham radio hobby. That's not necessarily the perspective of leading ham radio associations in the US and the UK.
Sure. And reasonable people can disagree about that. I would think that if something, if a publication, and I realize the principles don't change. So if you want to understand the principles of RF transmission at the most basic level, that doesn't change. And so, okay, maybe people want to charge for accessing that information. I get that. But you'd think that things that are, 20 years old or more, if it's still important, it's gotten republished in a newer format and maybe a more digestible for today's language and today's sensibilities than an older one would be. So, I don't own a publication, so I can't say yes or no.
That's exactly the perspective. Some want to guard their proprietary rights so that they can control them. Very understandable. I just think that the more people are exposed to technology, the more people will be interested in it, particularly the historical aspects.
Well, let's pivot to the technology part about what you do, and then I want to understand a little bit more about how do you financially keep this thing going, because electricity is not free, neither is internet access, and those servers are not cheap, even if they're not Google servers. But first, if I don't know if you're in the same room now as you were before with your scanner bed, but you're not ripping pages out of magazines and shoving them into an all-in-one printer scanner. You're doing something a little bit better than that, aren't you?
We use the kinds of scanners that either universities use for saving or converting into digital form libraries, European-made scanners that will read an open book, straighten out the curved or arched pages, and make a final scan out of that. That's very slow because you have to turn the pages individually. When I get something that I own and can slice up by cutting the binding off, I put it through a sheet-fed scanner, one of which is right behind me, as you can sort of see. This is a Kodak Alaris 4250. It will scan at about 220 pages, 110 sheets per minute. And anything that you can cut up, whether it's a book or a magazine or a set of coverage maps or manuals, I can put through that and do a 1,000-page directory in less than 10 minutes.
Oh my goodness. How about the OCR part of that? Is that at the same time or later?
When I scan, as all scanners do, in bitmap format, and then I process them to try to improve the contrast on faded pages to make them more black and white rather than gray and dark gray. And then after that processing, they are converted into readable PDFs by the same software that lots of banks, insurance companies, government agencies use to very accurately OCR even handwriting. This is not Adobe Acrobat. This is a high-end type of software, and you pay basically by the page every year, but it's well worth it to do this kind of job.
Chris, did I hear you wanting to say something or ask a question?
No, I was kind of nodding in agreement and taking it all in. when you can't slice and dice, you mentioned the library style scanner, and I've seen those genealogy circles use them a lot, especially with old documents as well. Sort of a similar setup. So you're ringing a bell in my recollection on that. You've mentioned, and maybe you're avoiding the question that Kirk asked about, how do you afford all this? Do you accept donations? I don't see any advertising on the site, so I'm kind of curious how financially it's kept up.
I don't accept donations because my accountant told me that is just going to make life intolerable. So for the moment, this is payback for 60 years in the broadcast industry. And I am basically financing this myself. And fortunately, my wife is a radio person too, who was in the industry for about 40 years. She understands it, except when I come back into the house covered with dust from paper shredders and things.
I've gotten all my questions answered. So the things that I haven't gotten answered are things that I don't know to ask. And so I want to call again upon my co-host, Chris Scherer, who's been in the publishing business. And surely you have some additional questions that I haven't asked yet. And then finally, we'll ask David to tell us what we didn't ask you yet. But Chris,
there you go. So we've covered we've gone through kind of the gamut of all the materials you have and you currently offer. What's not in your collection that you would like to add? Not that you have a lot of free time, it sounds like, but what else is out there that you would like to either launch a new section or maybe even get into something that's something new altogether even?
I say that my greatest needs are in areas where I don't have enough of a particular documentation. A good example was I wish I had copies of the FCC rules and regulations for each year going back to the original publications in the 30s. Another example would be more manuals for particularly earlier through the 50s and 60s, hollow state type broadcasting equipment. And from then on, it is basically anything related to what I already have, either completing collections or adding documents, I'd say catalogs, manuals, and FCC filings. I love to have things like directional antenna licensing process, license renewals back in the era when I can remember doing license renewals in the 70s, where it would take a box of the kind that 10 packages of copy paper came in to do your filing with the FCC for a major market license renewal. And anything else like that, even simple things like the documentation of a proof of performance, you name it. If it's an FCC, particularly technical or programming filing, not as much license transfers, although a few of those would be fun to have. Just giving deeper depth, pardon the redundancy, to the existing collection, adding anything that I don't have or where I have catalogs number 32 and 37, but not the ones in the middle of a particular manufacturer. And anything that looks like it fits on the site. People have come up with things like early ratings books. And generally, at all stations, when a new ratings book would come out, we would throw out the old ones so that a salesperson wouldn't be using the wrong data. So not a lot of those have survived. If somebody finds early Pulse and Hooper ratings, early Arbitrons, those are equally welcome. Obviously, that's outside of the technical area we're discussing, but if someone finds those stored somewhere at the station, anything like that, coverage maps, sales brochures, and anything related to the operation of a radio station is welcome. All one has to do, if they have any doubts, is send me an email saying, I found this, are you interested? And if a contributor doesn't have the budget, either themselves or through the station, I can just see going to the manager of a station in these troubled times and saying, can I spend $50 to send some old tech manuals to somebody in California? I don't think that's successful. I can provide prepaid UPS labels, and all you have to provide is the box and the shipping tape.
Very good.
Nice.
And that's actually, I contacted you as well, as I said, when at the very beginning of the webcast today, when I was looking for something and I stumbled on the site, and then I realized you were missing a few issues of a collection that I have. I figured, well, what the heck? And I remember sending you an email. You replied within a day, and I've submitted a few to you already, and I've got a handful of others sitting on my shelf that I can scan. The earlier issues were a little thinner. They're a little easier to scan myself and save the trouble. So I can do those as I get. I see you're missing some broadcast engineering issues, and if any of those are the old 300-page behemoths that they used to be, I might be shipping those to you.
I would love to have those. There's an interesting story about broadcast engineering. When it was closed without too much advanced knowledge by the actual staff of the magazine. And I contacted them as soon as I heard about it and asked if they could release their library. And I was told that, unfortunately, the owners of the magazine had been asked whether they could ship the magazines to a university library or someone who would preserve them, and they were told, no, that's too expensive, put them in the dumpster.
Which is really sad, because I know where that library lived. Radio Magazine had been split off from the same publisher by then, so I wasn't in the building or didn't have any ties to broadcast engineering anymore. And when you told me that story, which is now a few years after the fact, I wish I would have known. I wish I could have gotten involved, because I would have gone and picked them up myself and taken care of it. But hopefully some others out there also have a stash available of not just broadcast engineering, but anything you have. And like we've talked about all afternoon so far. I think you've got a great resource, and I certainly hope that everybody can contribute and offer something to keep it going and to keep building it up as you've got a great foundation.
One of the important things to me is the reason why these magazines and books are all in PDF format. They are downloadable and preservable on one's own computer. The idea is to make sure that there are multiple copies of all this material for the future. If for some reason my website does not endure, the copies will. Although I can't give you the name, but there's a noted radio museum with which I am working to guarantee the continuation and being preserved by all of this material well into the future.
Excellent. That's good to hear.
I can't imagine what else we would cover, but David, I've got to ask you, is there anything we haven't asked you that you want to make sure that our SBE members who are watching know about your site or your mission?
I think you've covered it all. One thing is, of course, I'm alone in the creation of the website, so we all know it's hard to error check oneself. And any error, any mistake, any bad link, please, if you see it, report it to me. I won't be offended. I'll actually be rather thankful for it.
Well, that's good to know.
And even better if the suggestion is made in a polite manner as opposed to mean-spirited.
The amazing thing is that in the entire history, and it's now close to 20 years of the site from its infancy, I have really had no negative or offensive emails. There are people who say, hey, magazine such and such is missing pages 41 and 42. Well, whoever owned the original copy probably tore it out so they could build a project that was documented there. And I can't do anything until somebody points it out and helps me find a more complete copy. I get lots of emails with single pages attached where people have said, hey, I notice you're missing those pages. And so I scanned them and here they are.
Wow.
Every little bit helps.
Yeah. David, this has been such a pleasure. And of course, we encourage everyone to go to worldradiohistory.com. I'm going to have to, when I bookmark it, I'm going to have to put in parentheses after it, rabbit hole, because you can spend a lot of time finding out amazing, cool stuff. You'll forget all about Facebook and eBay and Twitter, whatever you spend your time doing. You're going to, if you're watching this show, you know I know who you are. And that's the kind of personality we have. We're going to be stuck down this rabbit hole of exploring lots of holes. Chris, when you showed that very first page from the SBE's newsletter, I thought, oh, there's 2 articles right there I want to look at. So I've got a feeling there's going to be a lot of that.
It's up there, the SBE Journal. That's with the very start. And just kind of a bit of history on that. John Battison's love was publishing. And while he liked what the society could do, I think in the back of his mind, he thought this is another outlet for me to do some publishing and spread the word and help educate others through the publication process as well. So a little bit of a 2-pronged effort, I guess, in that respect from the society.
One question that hasn't been asked is how many page views does the site get daily, monthly, annually? And the answer is somewhere between 20 and 25,000 average page views per day, and somewhere around 2/3 of a million page views a month. And we're up around 32 or 33 million total page views since I started counting the page views.
Wow.
Impressive.
Wow. That is impressive. All right, we've got to go. David Gleason with worldradiohistory.com. It's an incredible site. Thank you, David, for spending an hour with me and with Chris Scherer. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you, of course, mostly for the work that you've done, this tireless effort of love and a real benefit to our whole industry and those curious about it.
Thank you for inviting me. This has been a great deal of fun, and I hope everyone can enjoy the website and some of you can contribute.
All right. Chris Scherer, thank you for your help today. I really appreciate you setting us up with David Gleason.
Absolutely. And again, Dave, thanks for being here. This has been the SBE Webxtra, the SBE chapter of the web. We present this monthly, and we hope you'll join us each time. We'll post the replay on our YouTube channel, usually within about a day or so. The SBE Webxtra is sponsored by Katrine, whom we thank for their support. Katrine, unique experience, individual solutions, reliable performance. If you hold SBE certification, viewing the SBE Webxtra qualifies you for 1/2 point in Category G under attendance, just like attending a local chapter meeting. And that does it for this installment of the SBE Webxtra from the Society of Broadcast Engineers, the Association for Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Professionals. Thanks again to our guest, Dave Gleason, and on behalf of Kirk Harnack, we'll see you next month.